One of the topics I think that's near and dear to everybody's heart is how you make money getting content and services to consumers. And so a lot of people will like to put acronyms around that. And so OTT, for anybody who's not familiar with it, it's just over the top. And it basically the concept of using IP networks and other types of networks to get content and services directly to consumers outside of what historically has been some of the walled gardens. And so we'll take a little bit of a different spin on that today. Is we're going to treat this panel as our esteemed panel here that will introduce themselves in a second are going to be consultants for you, the customer. And you, the customer, are going to be a project manager at a large cable company who's just been assigned the task of coming up with a strategy to get content and services to consumers' devices. And we're going to lead you through a little bit of an exercise of some of the common pitfalls, timelines, and questions that should be asked as you're designing your over-the-top service and getting it to your consumer base. And then we'll have a little surprise ending for you, a trick or treat, if you will, to shake things up. So with that, myself, I'm Tim Napoleon. I'm the moderator of the panel today, co-founder of a company called All Digital in Irvine, where we help broadcasters get their content and services to device. And then I'll let the panelists introduce themselves, starting with
John Oliverius. I'm Vice President in the Legal and Business Affairs Group for A&E Networks. I'm Distribution Counsel for the Distribution Group, which means which is the group that is handling transactions with cable and satellite operators and OTT entities, and I handle transactions, both traditional and digital.
And Barry Hartman, I am a product manager at Adobe. I have product management responsibilities for Adobe Access. This is our DRM product. I also have product management responsibility for our video stack that's part of the Flash player, and as well, now that we're making that available outside of the runtime, I own product management there.
All right. My name is Mark Taylor. I work for a company called Level 3 Communications. We're a global fiber-based telecommunications company. I'm responsible for some of the products there, and two in particular I think are appropriate for this panel. One is the Content Delivery Network, or CDN, where we deliver the content over the internet. And the other one is a service called Vivix Solutions, where we carry contribution and distribution feeds for the TV industry over fiber. So we kind of bridge the traditional broadcast world and the internet world.
Great. So obviously every good app starts with Dog the Bounty Hunter, right? You can't have a good experience without that. So me as the cable PM, one of the first things I'm going to do in this process is go, okay, I'm going to define what type of content I'm going to want to put into this app. And so what are some common kind of things that if I'm a technology person who's coming to you to say, hey, I'm going to get some of this great content. Right. What do you want to have me prepared so that it makes your job easy to say yes and get good content into my app?
Well, let me think about this. Let me sort of respond from my perspective as the lawyer listening to or interacting with the business people who are, first in their first meetings with the other side. I'm going to want to understand how, what sort of box to put the deal into and what sort of the outline is. And so it sort of starts with what's the model that the operator in this instance is really looking for. Are they looking
so it's an example of some models might be, hey, are you going to use this as live linear? Right. Are you going to use this as subscription on demand? Are you going to use this as VOD on demand? And that's a great point, because sometimes people will go out and license a bunch of rights and they don't license the right things, and then they come back and say they have to start that process almost all over again because they didn't ask the right at the right time.
Right, right, absolutely. They're going to, from the start, and they should be thinking about, is this, how long term is this? Is in that future, are we looking to distribute the content on a linear basis? Are we looking to distribute the content on an on-demand basis? Sort of starting with on-demand. There's several different models, and there's a model where you may be thinking of, well, I just want my subscribers to have access to this. This is a very sort of primary model, and if the the content provider, the program supplier has apps or sites. Perhaps they have something where you can actually authenticate your subscribers on that site or on that app. That's sort of an easy way to do it if that's there.
So that's popularized, Barry, right, with like an Adobe Pass type model?
Yeah, Adobe Pass has been pretty popular in the U.S., covering pretty much 98% of homes today through their cable or satellite vendor covered by Pass. It works really well for programmers who are trying to get their streams out to the end user. It's actually a federated model where the cable company, MSO, or satellite signs up with Pass, and then the content providers sign up as well. So it's one integration for either side. And with that, then, all of the subscribers for any of the MVPDs are then able to get to any of the programmers who also sign up with Pass. So it's kind of a brilliant solution from TV Everywhere. It's a single integration for either side, the programmer or the pay TV service.
So as you're going through this checklist with the content owner and the person, and then the person's trying to license the content, you kind of delved out and you figured out what the rights are going to be and what the use case. What type of process, if I'm putting together kind of a project plan for that, what's a reasonable time frame to help kind of, where have you seen that variance kind of be?
Well, if it's, sort of authenticating to a site that's already built and through Adobe Pass, I think it's a pretty fast process. I mean, relatively fast. The harder approach, the approach that's going to require a longer time frame is if you as the operator want to host the content. So if you're hosting and serving the content, then you're talking about really marrying your architectures, and then it involves file delivery, file format, security. You have to get all these processes, integrated. And that's, just a, definitely you're going to have the tech teams working together, but straight away from the deal point, at the point where you're structuring the deal, then you're really going to also need to get into the nitty-gritty of monetization and measurement. Particularly for, and I guess I'm sort of thinking about this from my perspective at an ad-supported cable network, where for us that's our lifeblood. If you're at, if it's HBO or Stars, that's a much simpler model where it's a subscription model and you don't really necessarily have to worry about ads. But with us, we need to find a way to to make sure that we're counting the eyeballs, that we're not just losing the eyeballs. And so in that scenario, you're going to have to work through things like ad server integration. You're going to have to work through dynamic ad insertion, for example. You're going to need to work with delivery of files in quick turn if it's in the Live Plus 3 or the C3 window. So that's a longer process.
Great. And so Barry, delving into that kind of hosted model. So there's your background is you worked at, previously at Verimatrix and now Adobe and content security and hosting. Delve into a little bit, that could be a whole panel itself, but delve into a little bit of that business process. What's the difference? A lot of people get confused upon authentication, device registration, then actual DRM. Maybe if you could kind of just shed some light on what that hosted security, what are some of those big buckets that you want to kind of check down on?
Well, sure. I think even just still staying on the agreement for your content, you're going to need to, before you can close, decide what you're doing for protecting that content. There's going to be process things around how you ingest content, what you're doing to protect it. What's the DRM or conditional access system you're using to protect is going to have to be chosen. There will be very explicit things in the content agreements that identify what you have to have in place to protect that content before you sign. So you got actually quite a bit of infrastructure you have to make a decision on before you're going to even be able to close the content agreement. There's a lot of things to choose from here. There's a lot of fragmentation, right? There's different streaming formats. Certainly, some of the panels here discussing Dash. There's HLS because you're going to have an iPod or an iPad or iPhone in your network. You're going to be using HLS, but is that what you're going to use to go to all the devices? You're going to have to choose that. The number of things that you're going to also have to look at from the device perspective is what's the encodes you're going to be able to support or that you need to support. If you're going to support Android, Are you going to go back to Android 2.3? Because it has very specific meaning in what the encode of your content is going to be. We've got customers who have 17, 19, 20 encodes today, and they're looking at that's going to grow as we get more devices out there that need different screen sizes and all the range of bit rates. So there's quite a bit of decision even to close what you're going to have on the content agreement.
And then one of the points that you made is your rights for the content are going to be predicated on the user and how many devices they can have. And so one of the things around now you're managing that conditional access, the conditional access that you mentioned, you're going to have to start tracking some things across all of your end customers, right? In terms of what devices are accessing what content.
Yeah, the content, I mean, some content owners will allow you to, a certain title can go SD to desktop, but not to an embedded device. And sometimes it's the other way around. You can go to higher value content to the desktop, but not to the embedded device. There's lots of individual, who your content owner is going to define some of those things. Then the device counts will vary from content owner to content owner. Sometimes only a single device can be active for a subscriber at times. Other times it can be multiple. So, yeah, you're going to, if you are an MVPD and you're going to go over the top, think about all that you're doing today in subscriber management. You're going to somehow have to tie to that, either replicate it or tie into that when you bring your content over the top. So are you going to do a provisioning step like you do with a set-top box? Will you have a provision of the consumer's device? Or are you going to, some content's going to require exactly who that subscriber is because of the payments that you're going to have in place. So it's really going to, if you think about the things you put in place for your managed network, there's a lot of extensions to that. And one of the things we talked about earlier, is it a separate project and tied in? Or is it really just a natural extension of what you've been doing for your managed network?
Right. The Mark, one of the things there is talking about getting that content. Now that you've got that content kind of at that head end, and you've got it out authenticated to the device, there's probably a lot of different options of how you're going to ultimately, get that content in and get it back out onto the network. So what are a lot of people doing today? Are they building their own networks? Are they leveraging third parties? What are some of the options that people are considering?
Well, all of the above, I think, yeah. So if you're talking about an MSO doing this over their own network, some people are using services provided by the CDNs. Some are building their own through either open source software or buying devices from companies that sell those sorts of devices. I'd take a step back, though, and just say that there's a huge amount of complexity potentially here. And the two impacts of that in terms of the person that's trying to build this from the program perspective is twofold. One is you have to make sure if you're thinking about your brand and you're thinking about the monetization of it, whether it's ad-supported or subscription-based, that the quality has to be really, really good and appropriate for the device that it's shown on. And so you really have to spend time thinking about how all of those bits that we just talked about fit together, because it's unlikely to be provided by a single company. And that workflow is important, and it affects the quality. If you take the wrong decisions or you interconnect incorrectly between two pieces of workflow, you're going to affect the quality. And I like to say that there's like a three strikes and you're out, right? If you buffer 3 times in a stream, most people just abandon it and they'll just go somewhere else. So you lose the ad revenue and you're likely to lose subscribers as well. But then the other issue is on the back end, you need to have some very detailed analytics. Analytics about who's watching what, when, where, for how long, so that you can feed back and get that cycle going around what's working, what's not working, both from the workflow that you put together plus the content that you have and the subscription model you have.
Great. So what are so going through that process again, starting up front, really working with your content partner to define what this project's going to be, working with your technology vendors to make sure that you understand, how you're going to live up to the expectations and the security requirements and the end user, performance requirements, kind of working through all that. Now, I think you've got a pretty good kind of master plan that you can work against that deck. What are some kind of common things or things that jump out at you that you've seen gone, either gone horribly right or horribly wrong in kind of designing this process and document?
Well, I'd say it's it hasn't. I don't know if there's anything that's common enough yet. Out from, at my point in the chain, I think the question is more to what happens on the technology side, and I would just point out that there's this tension between everything that Barry mentioned about absolutely true. There's incredible detail around the content security and the technical specifications and the parameters, and then quality. And yet, if you're the MVPD, if you're the distributor, you may be wanting to do a long-term deal. These may not be 2 to 3 years. It could be longer, and you want to also have some flexibility. And there is this tension where the programmer is very invested and very interested in content security and all these things, and the distributor may want some flexibility. So, what I like to do to sort of bring people together on that is to have the and this is sort of typically what happens is that the technical specifications often can be worked out between the tech ops people who are working on the deal and hopefully stay out of the deal the lawyer's hands as much as possible.
I'd say that it's Mark's comments about really knowing what the consumer experience like. That's the one thing I think when we get calls from our customers and trying to understand, they're getting reports from end users. It's really knowing what's going on. I mean, if you think about how well instrumented the managed network is to the set-top box and knowing what's happening, that's usually not in place when people take their content over the top. And some I will say some MVPDs look at this as it's a necessary thing, and the consumer's not paying incrementally for it. And they will sometimes say, as an example, the Android choices, I'll go back there. How well will the video play on an Android 2.2 device that's old, that right now is still 15% of the Android handsets out there? Some MVPDs will say, we're going to blacklist and not let them have a bad experience. Others will say, we'll just let it go. The consumer will choose on their own. But in all cases, just really being able to detail and know all the way to the endpoint, or if you're familiar with cellular networks, everything's instrumented, including having live handsets out in the field, and they can see and measure what the experience is really like. That's what I don't see happening in over-the-top delivery, is really knowing, before the customer even calls, what's going on. And certainly at the point when they do call, how long does it take to figure out why video's not playing? In many cases, the abandonment, you may not even know people are having problems. So I'd say it's really having a really managed network approach to quality of service and quality of experience.
Yeah, I think that at the macro level, probably one of the biggest things that goes wrong is an overbuild or an underbuild, because it's really, really hard to predict demand here. And you don't want to overspend necessarily, but you also don't want to underspend. That's relatively easy to fix after the event, though. The bigger issue is that then it is back to the analytics of the workflow. And if you're looking at the quality of streams at the kind of the top level, it can look all right, and you can be saying that you're getting a decent throughput on the majority of the time, and the number of skip sessions or abandoned or buffered sessions are relatively low. But when you start to dig into the fact that actually when you look at stuff that's delivered to a Wii that was encoded in this format that went through that ISP, you might find a very, very different story. And so you might find a subset of your customer base that have a very, very different experience to the average. And therefore being able to dive down to that level of detail and then figure out what's going on and then fix it is important. And really the answer to the question is everything, right? Because of that complexity of the environment, of the different streaming protocols, different devices, different formats of this, that, and the other, and all the different networks, both your own network and then if you're allowing your customers to go off onto other networks, all of those things are important, and all of those things, because you're interconnecting bit streams, stuff can go wrong. And this stuff doesn't generically work everywhere without a high degree of touch and vigilance.
I think one of the things that we've learned in a bunch of these projects is oftentimes people don't put in an appropriate amount of QA into the overall. As you can see, the number of business systems that are colliding here, for lack of a better word, is pretty immense. And a lot of times historical web development technologies would be, yeah, you're going to, throw the site up at 12 o'clock and let it rip. And if something's, not working quite right, you can make some adjustments and fix it. I think in this model, it's a lot more complicated. And so what we've seen, a lot of things is incremental testing along the way. And so as your project manager, you don't have a cliff of you don't have any technology that you've actually seen working together until the day before your product launch, and then I hope it goes well. You want more of all of these different pieces being tested along the way and tested in the wild. So one of the things that's great is there's services out there like U-Test and other things where you can give components of your software to actual end users in the markets that you're going to go to, and they'll run it.
That's a really important point, testing in the wild, because that's the bit that's hard to do, right? In a lab, it's relatively easy to plug all this stuff together, but the analytics that you need are from real customers, in real houses, with real consumer environments, because that has a big impact too on how this stuff all works together. And doing that at volume and at scale to stress test your back-end systems and the delivery system. And it's pretty hard to do. And so therefore launching in a small way, launching on 1 or 2 devices first before you start to ramp up devices, launching with small catalogs, launching with smaller encode options, etc., I think is probably the way to go. Doing it in a very controlled, phased environment, and recognizing that the first few weeks or so are going to be a beta test, whatever you've done in the past in terms of bench testing.
What Mark mentioned about abandonment made me think of something. I was getting into Game of Thrones. Everybody does at some point, and I was watching it on Xfinity, and I was having stuttering issues, and it wouldn't work, and so eventually I went to HBO Go. So there's another door, right? You could be abandoning the distributor's platform for the platform that the network has built, and in that case, the network has all of these problems as well, all these challenges, quality of service, quality of experience, building a customer service function. These things that are not sort of typical to the network's experience, but are definitely, part of it now.
I would be curious, is there any data out there? Have you guys seen any data? This is a trick question. I didn't ask this before the panel, but just be curious. I have some data that we've gathered, but I'll let you guys answer first. But what do you think is a fair kind of, if you cover 50% of the market and they have a good experience, that's sufficient? Or is it 80%? What's the number people are shooting for, specifically kind of probably on that tablet and handset market right now?
Well, the experience itself will differ, right? So what you can get on my iPhone's disappeared, but what you can get on an iPhone is obviously going to be a different experience to what you would get if you plugged it somehow into your TV. But from our customers' perspective, the ones that are the biggest brands treat it like television, and if they've made it available on the device, they expect it to work, and they expect it to work within the parameters that they've set with that device, and they're fairly close, right? And the things that they concentrate on are the sustained streaming speed, throughput, bandwidth, and the number of buffering events or stall skip sessions or whatever. Those are the 2 things that really matter to people, and they're paranoid about those numbers in the same way as they would be for their TV output if it's the same company.
So we've talked about this kind of use case, right, where the product manager at a large existing entity that has an existing media business is going to extend their OTT solutions. We talked through some of that parallels. So let's say that all of a sudden that cable entity is getting a little pressure from Netflix and they have to do some layoffs. So our poor little PM gets whacked, and he goes up on Monster and he goes, oh, cool, there's this awesome company in San Francisco that's just starting from scratch. And so they're going to reinvent television and whatever that means and bring it straight over the top, none of the legacy business. And so we're consultants again, and we're going to change our kind of pitch and show some compare and contrast to some of the different things that you would talk about with that person versus their traditional business partner that was the cable company. So I guess starting here, where would you think some of the things that you might, are you going to take the guy's call? But no. Where's that? How's this going to differ? What are some things that you're going to see?
If I had a nickel for every company that was going to reinvent television, the first thing they're going to run up against is the content issue, that they need to secure the content rights. And this industry, they're going to, if they want to compete with with cable, it's getting increasingly difficult. If they want to sort of, certainly you're not going to take content that program suppliers are providing to the cable and satellite industry, you're not going to be able to take it away on an exclusive basis. And in fact, exclusivity is to some extent going away, I think, for in general, just because cable and satellite operators are jumping into authentication, across the board. But there's been the sort of space for library content, for entertainment content, with that Netflix and Amazon have traditionally had.
So you're going to say yes to Bounty Hunter season 1, Dog the Bounty Hunter season 1?
Might go back to season 1, right?
Yeah,
right, season 1.
It's a start.
Yeah.
It's a market out there, maybe. So Barry, what would you?
I think the one place that I see something different. I'm not really sure what how relevant it is to understand. It's a new business. What are you doing for subscriber management is now different. The MVPD likely is integrating whatever they're doing over the top to their existing, entitlement system or subscriber system or billing system. That's all brand new here. So, that's work that, I guess that's incremental work that the MVPD didn't have to do. In some cases, that might be better. Some of the systems that are in place that have been there for some time on the billing systems are quite old, and maybe there's easier to come up with whatever the new pricing model you're going to have is easier to put in place. But I think that's the one place I see there's incremental work aside from the content acquisition issues.
I think it mostly gets harder because there's no sense of any part of the network, for example, being controlled or in your own control. If you're the MSO, you clearly, you may only do it over your own portion of the network, so you're in control of a lot more of it. So in that sense, it gets harder. The rights are going to get harder if you're allowing, total portability across devices and networks. So that's kind of the bad news. The good news is there's lots of companies that's what they do, right? And so you're not in most MSOs have this, and certainly the bigger ones have a self-build mentality. They've got to build it, so they've got to figure out all of those issues that we just talked about from a technology perspective. The good news is if you're going completely over the top, there's lots of companies like ours, like Level 3 and others, and Adobe and such that that's what we do, right? And at various different layers of that stack. So it's assembling. You can assemble an A team, right? You can assemble the people that have done this and found all those issues and found the pit holes and have got the scars to say, well, you need to do this, this, and this. And people that run it at scale with huge amounts of video that's delivered over the internet and monetized very well.
I think the one other place I can think of is trying to just understand what's the scale you have to have. What are my spikes going to be in the first quarter? If the MVPD going over the top, at this point they probably have some notion of how many of their subscribers are at least trying to connect over the top. Doing something new, the Olympics, pressured everybody to try to understand what were the spikes going to be now during the Olympics. The opening ceremony sort of worries. If it's a brand new business, that's what you don't know. How quickly, I've got actually content owners that are doing some, go direct to consumers, and they just don't know what's the first month going to bring. What are the spikes going to happen when they put out, a new piece of content, a new movie? Will suddenly really hit, and they have just no notion of scale. MVPD, the real problem is how many people are really going to jump on with their iPad and start viewing something. But at least at this point, they probably have some notion of that.
So, maybe one of the pieces of advice I'd give a new OTT service is maybe find an area that, in the case of an A&E, maybe you're not huge yet in certain areas of Asia, or maybe you're not huge in certain areas where you could come as a business partner where you maybe have less incumbent revenue, where you could be more of a partner to open up new markets, and you may be more receiving of that offer.
Right. Well, so maybe instead of saying we're going to be the great entity that brings your primetime television content to you, you can still go to studios. You can still go to other program suppliers, other than the networks that are that are in direct business with, everybody's sort of part of the system in some way, but there may be more opportunities there.
I think the other parallel I can draw is something new. MVPD will do friends and family sort of trials. It's not open to the wild, to their entire subscriber base. The startup could just do a very soft launch in certain regions and just geo block it to just San Francisco to start. I would think, that's the parallel between the two, and that's the way you're going to have to start out to make sure it doesn't, you get kind of that chance of someone trying the service once, and when will they come back if they don't like it? So,
I think one of the other really challenging things I've seen with the fresh slate OTT providers is there's this timeline that's out of their control. There's a lot of third-party dependencies, whether that's the network that they've selected is successfully integrated the DRM that the content owner is requiring. It's successfully got the right encoding capacity for them to get all their content ready to go and prepped, to get the contracts and legal completed. These are all things that could have months, sometimes even years of lead times. And so as you are managing maybe employees and cash flow and other types of considerations, your launch date of, hey, we need to launch in 30 days and we need to have all this revenue coming in to make our balance sheet work, that may not be realistic. You may have to have quite a buffer there to understand how long it's really going to take to get into this business, because there's definitely some lead times that are out of your control.
There are, and that's in both ways. It's kind of schizophrenic, right? Because there's a whole bunch of live stuff that it's amazing how many people leave it to the last minute, and then everything needs to be done. But then, yeah, you're right. The longer-term, bigger plays that are a sustained business model. I mean, we've been working on some for 4 years, and the biggest deal, we're all ready to go. Everyone's itching to go, but the rights are still not signed, or some of the rights agreements are still not signed, or they change along the way, which then influences what you thought you were going to build and how you were going to build it. So, yeah, it's a very, very difficult environment still to negotiate, both because of the rights complexity and the technology complexity.
So with that, I thought we have some time here to take some questions from the audience and get some answers, and then they'll probably lead to some additional questions or answers. So anybody want to ask anything from the audience? You guys got everything figured out? I'm gonna start asking questions if you don't. Okay.
Mark, the kind of evolving role of CDN to just help us deliver content to where we had already done deals to. How do you see kind of your role, the opportunities for CDNs to evolve as your services are certainly expanding over the last few years?
Yeah, good question. I think it probably depends on who the CDN is that you're talking to, right? Because we all have, I think, slightly different business models. So from my perspective, I mentioned at the beginning that we're kind of bridging this world between the traditional world and the internet world that we're talking about. And so from my perspective, it's trying to add on the capabilities of that workflow I talked about that does make it simple and makes one party, i.e. us, the one throat to choke. But able to do that at scale and able to do that in a way that doesn't naturally become too customized. And it's kind of a difficult game to play because there is still no. I mean, Dash is one thing that's happening that maybe starts to standardize to some things, but from the technology perspective, there's still a huge amount and to some degree growing amount of things. And it's very difficult if you're trying to build these big network capabilities at scale to do all of it in a way that makes any sense and makes it economical. But at the same time, there is value in trying to simplify some of that thing and offer something at scale that's easy to use and easy to consume. So that's the direction that we're trying to go. The other part, which I think is common to everyone, is the thing that we talked about, which is providing more analytics and providing more analytics from the players, i.e. the real customer experience, and finding ways of beaconing back data associated with every individual transaction that takes place. That's really, really important. And actually the CDN industry itself has kind of grown up with synthetic testing, which just isn't granular enough and actually isn't even close to the real customer experience. And as you push the boundaries of what you want to do with your customer experience, and as you expect them to start paying money or consume ads, that's really, really important. And the technology hasn't been there until very recently and still isn't broadly distributed enough across all of the platforms to enable the industry to have that data to hand in as granular a way as possible.
Great. Next question. All right. So I'll ask a question. What are some sites or OTT players right now that you see out there that are doing some things really right, and maybe give an example of something you think they're doing really right?
Major League Baseball, from my perspective, are kind of like the poster child in terms of that combination of making lots of money out of doing it and doing it really, really well with a really high quality customer experience. And they've really thought about those two ends, right? They have thought deeply about the workflow, and if you ever get the opportunity to see what they've done from how they capture the pictures in the baseball grounds to how they get it to iPad or whatever device, they really, really think about that whole environment. But also then the quality of the experience that they provide to the people that watch on the devices, right, with all of the other additional information and data around the game. So it's more than just you're watching a video, a live stream of a game. It's a much more immersive experience. And to such an extent that a huge number of people that are watching the game live at the event location still have an iPad or an iPhone and are consuming some sort of MLB data on another screen. So I would say that the way that they pulled that complete package together, they would stand out for me.
NBC Sports has been doing great, obviously, during the Olympics. A lot of people probably in the room here had some experience with going there, whether or not you went to the on-demand site, which anybody could go, or the live site, which required you to do some sort of authentication from your MVPD. I think what I've seen them do with the Olympics, and expanding out to what they're doing. I don't know how many people here watch Sunday Night Football, but that's been, I think, a really good experience, and I think we'll start to see them expand. But what they're doing today with bringing that content, letting the user come in line online rather than having to be sitting in front of their TV to be able to watch wherever they are to catch those sports, I think has been a really good experience so far.
I mean, my pretty unprofessional opinion on this one is that just in general, those sites that not only have the quality of experience, the first-class consumer experience, but also, do something to make the site sticky and provide, deep experience and deep content experience. I think, in general, those, I think that's a terrific strategy.
Yeah, I think another one I think is pretty cool. You guys can download it. Is the Cox Media Group, the KTVU app. I think they did a nice job of kind of re-envisioning local news. And so they took a lot of the different segments that are typical to local news and broke that down, kind of took advantage and did more than just kind of rebroadcast the live content. They added in a lot of interactivity, maps, and other things that accompany the nightly and morning news. So I think that's kind of another great example of an OTT play that's, adding value and not taking away from the existing markets. I think that's a cool one in the iTunes store for the iPad.
I think example. That brings up a thought about the MVPDs who are trying to bring linear content online. Mm-hmm. We talk about the TV-like experience, and I think that's really speaking to the quality of service. Most are trying to get that working really well and thinking to what are the new use cases? What's the 5-minute clips may be more appropriate for a mobile connection than some live linear channel that you're going to play back on your mobile phone. So I think what's coming next is continuing to improve the quality, but look to the new use cases. What's going to drive consumption on mobile devices? If you have an ad-supported service, consumption on mobile is something you really need to see come up. And, that means maybe new content agreements to allow you to cut the content up more. Maybe from studios, it's clips instead of whole movies. We're going to see I think we'll start to see some evolution in really saying it's more than just bringing what you're consuming today on your cable or satellite to a mobile device. It's what are the new things you're going to do. People have been playing around with the companion notion. Social networking is always, something people point to during award ceremonies or sports programs. But what are the other things we're going to see? And I think that's where some of them are really saying we've got to co-opt over the top completely. We have to think of new ways. What else can they? What's new from our service beyond just saying you can watch it on a different device?
I think some members of the audience have added gambling in some of the other markets where gambling is legal, and that adds another element of fun to the video experience. So It's little things like that. We add interactivity to the content. A lot of fun you can have there.
I'll get that right to Abby Raven.
Monetization ideas. Great. Let's maybe in closing here at the last minute or two. Obviously, the panel here is a wealth of resources in terms of helping out the audience here, and maybe you guys can point to some of your own internal resources as well as some of your favorite sites to get more information. I mean, beyond streamingmedia.com, it's the de facto standard, and Jan's Bible on the streaming Bible, the streaming media Bible. You just don't those two, but any other resources or kind of follow-up sites that you recommend to the audience to kind of further their education on this topic?
Aside from individual product or services we're offering, I'd say just keep trying as many different content services as you can. Get a Roku box at home and try it out, and you'll recognize that search and discovery is really important, and no one's figured that out really well yet. I'd say try as much stuff as you can. Figure out what people are doing that's working and where things are failing. My experience of getting on a Roku box led me to understand a lot of things, right, about what's different than having your cable subscription. So I'd say that's maybe the best thing. Your own experience can inform you a lot.
I would say, well, from if you're sort of in the position where you're building a transaction, I mean, the most valuable people to me are always the engineers who are actually, know what the product is and are working with the operations, and that sort of speaks to just the entire deal process. That, right now, these deals require a lot of, I think, mutual understanding and exploration. It's just such a nascent stage. But that's not traditionally like how many, if you think of, cable and satellite deals, that's not necessarily the way, they've been historically done. But, I think they do require the people who understand the operations in, sort of exquisite detail to work together and to create new systems pretty much deal by deal.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, I don't, stuff always turns into kind of marketing speak when you have a certain number of websites, and they're less valuable than going and spending time with the people that are managing a live event or have built an over-the-top platform, right? And actually talking to the people that experience the things that we've been talking about day to day, I think, is much more valuable if you can. And we can do that. But that's a very different approach to pointing to some collateral or some white paper or something that can try and put it down in words, but it's harder to do that. And when you go and see what is effectively a master control for the internet that's running, we did the presidential debates, for example, or the World Triathlon Series, or a whole bunch of sporting events like that, which really kind of test this stuff to the extreme, and you go and see what's involved and the technology behind the scenes and what people are doing on a day-to-day basis and what was built in advance. I think that's really the thing that helps people the most.
I can actually think of one more. It's an analog to a different industry, but the IT industry, I think, went through lots of pains over the last, say, 20 years. And I think in this case, I would value somebody who's worked on the managed network side and bring that to the over-the-top. And the reason, the analogy to the IT industry is, back with the old mainframes, the people who ran and managed those mainframes knew a lot of stuff around process and what to do. And once IT with distributed computing and desktops realized that what happened in the old mainframe networks, the processes they had in place, that's when IT was really able to start managing all the computing equipment. And I'd use that as an analogy here. Bring the over-the-top. Somebody for over-the-top should really start looking at somebody who's worked in a managed network environment, because they've been through those issues of keeping it running with, no glitches on the video stream. So I think that would be really valuable to anybody building a business.
We've actually seen that in some of the bigger media companies, right? At the start, there was the traditional TV guys, the traditional broadcast guys, and then there's this little internet unit somewhere else in the business, and they kind of did things quickly and threw things together. But they never did it with the thought to it scaling to a big audience of people that were going to care about what was eventually a television quality, right? And what's happening in many of the companies is those things are coming together in the sense that the internet thing is now so important, it needs to be thought about in the way that the traditional TV guys thought about it, which is paranoia around quality from origination to eyeball, never failing, never going down, and slowly changing things and not changing it until you know exactly what's going to happen. And that completely different mindset is starting to take a hold in the internet world. You've still got to marry that with the speed of development and the speed of innovation, but having that deeper engineering thought process that has been there for years in the traditional broadcast world, I think is starting to happen, is starting to get into from an organizational and personnel perspective into the internet world.
Yep.
Awesome. With that, I'm going to let everybody get home to their kids in costumes to do some trick-or-treating. I think there's a couple more panels today, but we're going to end right on time. I want to thank our panelists for a great panel today, and then we'll be available after here for a couple minutes to talk if you have questions.
Thanks.